The email from my father-in-law arrived at 6:38 a.m., nestled between a coupon for photo printing and a client's wedding inquiry. Important family discussion tonight. Dinner at 7. Don't be late. No pleasantries, no explanation, just Robert Morgan's typical directness. Something in my gut twisted as I read it, the same instinct that warns me when a storm is perfect for dramatic photographs but dangerous to chase. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Ellie Chen, and that email was the first domino in the collapse of everything I thought I understood about family loyalty. 10 hours later, standing in the kitchen where I'd spent countless afternoons watching my grandmother roll out dough for pork buns, I wished I'd followed my instinct and stayed away. "We've decided to sell the house," Robert announced, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "Kyle has an exceptional opportunity with his craft brewery expansion, and we're going to help him secure the Westfield location." The vintage serving spoon I'd been using to dish out green beans, the same one my grandmother had placed in my small hands when teaching me to serve guests properly, clattered against the ceramic dish. "Your what?" My voice sounded distant, to my own ears. Diana, my mother-in-law, quickly dabbed her lips with her napkin. "The Westfield property is perfect for Kyle's upscale brew concept. Prime foot traffic, existing bar infrastructure." "Mom, I've got this," Kyle interrupted, leaning back in his chair with that familiar self-satisfied smile. "We're talking artisanal small-batch brewing, food pairings from local chefs, exclusive tasting events. It's going to revolutionize Riverdale's craft beer scene." I held up my hand, unable to process anything beyond the first announcement. "You're selling my grandparents' house? This house? The one we're sitting in right now?" Mark, my husband, reached for my hand under the table. His palm was sweaty. He knew. He'd known before we arrived. "Ellie?" Robert set down his knife and fork, using the same patient tone he employed when explaining simple concepts to people he considered slow learners. "This house has been in our family for decades." "My family," I corrected automatically. "My grandparents' house. Which became part of our family when your grandmother sold it to us after your grandfather passed," Diana interjected. "We've maintained it for 15 years. At a substantial discount," I reminded her. "Because she wanted me to still have access to my childhood home." Kyle sighed dramatically. "Are we really going to argue about ancient history? The point is, this location is worth a fortune now that Oak Hill is becoming the hot neighborhood. The brewery needs capital, and this house is just sitting here underutilized." I turned to look out the window at the massive oak tree, its branches framing the garden shed where my grandfather had first taught me to develop photographs. The dark room was still there, preserved exactly as he'd left it. "What about my photography? Equipment? The dark room? All my childhood photos stored in the attic?" "We'll help you move everything to your apartment," Diana offered quickly. "Mark says you've been talking about converting that extra closet into a dark room anyway." I shot my husband a betrayed look. "That closet is barely big enough for my winter coats, let alone an enlarger and developing trays." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mark stared at his plate. "Look, sis," Kyle finally said, breaking the tension. "Change happens. You need to stop clinging to the past. This is a business decision." Something inside me snapped. "A business decision? This is the house where I learned to ride a bike on that driveway. Where I spent every Christmas morning opening presents in that living room. Where I cried for days after my parents' accident. Where I stayed with my grandmother until she got too sick to live alone. But sure, let's trade all that for your latest get-rich-quick scheme." "Ellie," Diana's voice carried a warning. "How much?" I demanded. "How much are you selling my childhood home for?" Robert cleared his throat. "The realtor suggests listing at $675,000. "I'll buy it," I said instantly. "I have savings. I can get a mortgage." "We've already accepted an offer," Robert said, his tone indicating the matter was closed. "The papers will be signed tomorrow." The room tilted slightly. "You already? You didn't even give me a chance." "Sweetheart," Mark finally spoke, his voice gentle. "We didn't think—" "No, you didn't think." I pushed back from the table. "Not about me, anyway. How convenient." "When do the new owners take possession?" I managed to ask, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. 30 days, Robert replied, returning to his meal as if we were discussing something as trivial as the weather forecast. I nodded, a strange calm replacing the initial shock. Perfect. Just enough time to watch another piece of my heritage get sacrificed for Kyle's latest passion project. Don't be melodramatic. Kyle rolled his eyes. I'll make it worth everyone's... While when upscale brew takes off, you'll see. Save it, I snapped. I don't want your IPAs or your excuses. I want the home my grandfather built with his own hands. I grabbed my purse from the counter, the same spot I'd always thrown my backpack after school. Ellie, please, Diana called as I headed for the door. Don't leave like this. I paused in the doorway, my hand on the frame where pencil marks still tracked my growth from age 6 to 16. You know what hurts the most? I turned back to face them. You didn't even consider me. Didn't think about what this house means to me. It's always been about Kyle, his dreams, his ventures, his failures. Well, congratulations on funding another one of his brilliant ideas. That's not fair, Kyle protested. Life isn't fair, I replied, meeting his eyes. But don't worry, big brother. I'm sure this time your brilliant plan will succeed. And if it doesn't, there's always your parents' retirement fund to fall back on, right? I walked out before anyone could respond, letting the screen door slam behind me. A sound so familiar it had been the soundtrack of my childhood summers. In my car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to scream or cry or both. Through the windshield, I could see the Thompson house across the street, its for sale sign freshly planted in the lawn. An idea began forming in my mind. If I couldn't save my grandmother's house, maybe I could do something else. Something that would make all of them understand exactly what they'd sacrificed. I pulled out my phone and called my best friend. Jasmine, it's me. Remember that former church building on Willow Street you showed me last month? I want to make an offer. Today. The expression on Jasmine's face was priceless. We were sitting on her back deck 2 days later, the evening air heavy with jasmine and honeysuckle from her carefully tended garden. You bought the Willow Street Arts Center, she repeated, setting down her wine glass carefully. Just like that. My offer was accepted this morning, I confirmed, a strange mix of determination and terror swirling in my stomach. It needs work, but the bones are good. And you're planning to turn it into a community photography center? Just like that? I leaned forward, pulling up the rough business plan I'd been working on for the past 48 sleepless hours. It's perfect. Just 5 separate studio spaces, that amazing skylight in what used to be the sanctuary, the basement darkroom possibilities. Ellie, Jasmine cut in, her realtor's pragmatism breaking through my enthusiasm. Have you actually run the numbers? On this? That building needs at least $100,000 in renovations before it's usable. I slid my laptop toward her. I've been working on nothing else since that dinner. Look. As she scrolled through my spreadsheets, proposed budgets, and market research, her professional skepticism slowly gave way to intrigue. There's nothing like this in Riverdale, I explained. Not since the community college closed their darkroom. People need a place to learn traditional photography, to connect with other artists. I can offer studio rentals, classes for kids, and adults, exhibition space. And it's just coincidentally located 3 blocks from your grandparents' house? Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The one Kyle is turning into his brewery headquarters? 4 blocks, I corrected, avoiding her knowing look. And that's beside the point. Is it? She handed back my laptop. Be honest with me, Elle. Is this about creating something meaningful? Or is it about showing Kyle and your in-laws that you can succeed where he'll probably fail? Before I could answer, the sliding glass door opened and Jasmine's neighbor Rachel poked her head out. Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you really starting a photography center at the old Willow Street Church? That's the plan, I replied, surprised. Rachel stepped onto the deck. My daughter Lucy is obsessed with photography. She's been begging me to find somewhere that teaches actual film developing since her high school cut their arts program. See? I gestured toward Rachel triumphantly. This is exactly why— Your phone's been lighting up, Jasmine interrupted, nodding toward my cell. 3 missed calls from Mark. 1 text. Please call me, we need to talk. I silenced it and turned it face down on the table. You'll have to talk to him eventually, Jasmine said gently. No, I really don't. I stood up and walked to the railing, looking out over the twilight-shadowed yard. They made their choice. Now I'm making mine. Rachel cleared her throat. Well, if you need any help with the photography center, I teach design at the community college. I'd love to be involved. I turned back, surprised once again. Really? Absolutely. The students need exhibition space, and I could coordinate some workshops. Jasmine watched me over the rim of her wineglass. See? This is already bringing people together. The next morning, I met Leo Kim, my contractor, at the Willow Street building. Standing in the soaring main room with light streaming through the stained glass windows, I felt a surge of rightness that pushed away any lingering doubts. The electrical needs a complete overhaul, Leo was saying, tapping on his tablet. And there's some water damage in the north wing, but the structural elements are solid. Whoever built this place built it to last. Like my grandfather, I murmured, running my hand along the worn wooden banister of the central staircase. What was that? Leo asked. Before I could respond, a familiar voice called from the entrance. So this is where you've been hiding. Mark stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. His shoulders were slumped in the way they always were when he was caught between family loyalties. I'm not hiding, I replied coolly. I'm working. He stepped inside, looking around with genuine curiosity. What is this place? The future home of Frame and Focus, I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. A community arts and photography center. You bought a building? His eyes widened. Ellie, that's a huge decision to make without consulting my spouse? I finished for him. You mean like the huge decision to sell my childhood home without consulting me? Mark winced. I deserved that. Leo, sensing the tension, muttered something about checking the roof and made a swift exit. Mom and Dad are worried about you, Mark said after an awkward silence. You haven't answered any of their calls. I've been busy. I gestured around the space. Starting a business takes focus. Is that what this is about? Competing with Kyle? I laughed, but it came out harsher than intended. Not everything revolves around your brother, Mark. Some of us actually create things that help people, not just ways to get drunk on overpriced beer. That's not fair. No? Then explain to me why your parents are willing to sell my grandparents' house, the house that contains the only darkroom where Edward Mitchell once developed his iconic Wilderness series to fund another one of Kyle's schemes. Mark ran a hand through his hair. It's not like that. Kyle has investors this time, real ones. Like the investors for that food truck venture last year, or the cryptocurrency opportunity that emptied his savings. Ellie, please. No. Mark. I took a deep breath. I've spent my entire relationship with your family being the practical one, the responsible one, while everyone bends over backward to support Kyle's dreams. Well, now I have a dream too. The difference is, Mine will actually help people, not just serve them alcohol. The hurt on his face made me regret my tone, if not my words. I just wish you had talked to me first, he said quietly. Like you. Talk to me about the house? I countered, but with less heat. He looked down. I should have told you earlier. I'm sorry. I wanted to stay angry. It was easier than feeling the pain, but the sincerity in his voice melted something in me. I need to do this, Mark, I said more gently. Not to compete with Kyle, but because this town needs it. Because I need it. He nodded slowly, looking around the space with new eyes. It's pretty amazing. The light in here is incredible. No! I smiled despite myself. Wait until you see the view from the roof. Before he could respond, my phone rang. The bank. I held up a finger and stepped away to take the call. When I returned, my face must have revealed the news because Mark asked immediately, "What's wrong?" "The loan," I said, my voice tight. "The bank wants more collateral than I can provide. They're concerned about the speculative nature of an arts center in this market." Mark hesitated for only a moment. "Use my software patents as collateral. They're valued at more than the loan amount." I stared at him, stunned. "Mark, those patents are your safety net. Your future. You're my future," he said simply. "And I believe in this. In you." I wanted to hug him, to accept this peace offering, but the wound was still too fresh. "Thank you," I said instead. "That means a lot." He nodded, understanding my hesitation. "I should go. Mom's hosting a dinner for potential brewery investors tonight." He paused at the door. "Will you come home later?" "I'm staying at Jasmine's for a few days," I replied. "I need some space to think." After he left, Leo returned with his assessment. Good news and bad news. The skylight can be restored, but it'll cost you. I looked up at the magnificent glass dome that would one day illuminate photographs and artists at work. "It's worth it," I said firmly. "Some things are too beautiful to lose." 3 weeks later, construction was well underway. I'd taken a leave of absence from my regular portrait photography business to focus on frame and focus. The loan had been approved with Mark's collateral, and we were slowly rebuilding our relationship, though I still couldn't bring myself to visit my grandparents' house, knowing it would soon belong to strangers. I was reviewing color samples for the studio walls when Jasmine burst in, waving her phone. "You're trending on social media. The Riverdale Register did a piece on your project." She thrust her phone at me. The headline read, "Local Photographer Transforms Historic Church into Arts Haven." I scanned the article, smiling at the reporter's enthusiasm about bringing arts education back to Riverdale. But one paragraph made my smile fade. Chen's community focus stands in stark contrast to other recent developments in Oak Hill, including the conversion of a historic craftsman home into headquarters for Upscale Brew, a venture by Kyle Morgan, Chen's brother-in-law. When asked about this family connection, Chen declined to comment. "I never declined to comment," I muttered. "They never asked." "That's not the point," Jasmine said. "Look at the comments." The community response was overwhelming. Parents eager for photography classes for their children. Retired hobbyists looking for darkroom access. Students seeking affordable studio space. And one comment that made my heart skip. As one of Edward Mitchell's former assistants, I'm thrilled to see his granddaughter carrying on his legacy of photography education. The town has missed this. "This is exactly what I've been talking about," I told Jasmine, my voice thick with emotion. "People need this space." A text from Mark interrupted our celebration. "Saw the article. So proud of you. Also, heads up, Kyle's not happy about the comparison the reporter made." As if summoned by the message, the front door banged open and Kyle stormed in, his face flushed. "What the hell, Ellie?" He waved his phone at me. "Trying to make me look bad in the local paper. Now?" "I didn't say a word about you or your brewery. I replied calmly. The reporter drew their own conclusions. You could have mentioned that upscale brew will include a gallery space for local artists, he fumed. That we're part of the cultural revival too. I raised an eyebrow. Is that in your business plan? Now? First I've heard of it. It was always... He stopped, looking around the space with new eyes. The renovation was already transforming the church, with its soaring ceilings now accentuated by dramatic lighting tracks, the original woodwork restored to a warm glow. This is actually impressive, he admitted reluctantly. Thanks, I said, surprised by his candor. But you're still competing with me, he added, his competitive nature reasserting itself. Opening just weeks before my launch, in the same neighborhood. The world doesn't revolve around you, Kyle, I sighed. I chose this location because it has the space and light I need for photography. And because it's walking distance from what used to be your grandparents' house, he retorted. Before I could respond, Leo appeared with an urgent expression. Ellie, we have a problem. The electrician found serious code violations in the previous wiring. We need to gut all of it. We're talking an additional $25,000 minimum. My stomach dropped. The contingency fund wouldn't cover that much. Kyle watched my face fall with an unreadable expression. Cutting corners on safety inspections? Not very community-minded of you. Get out, I said quietly. To my surprise, he didn't argue. At the door, he paused. You know, if you had just supported my brewery from the beginning, maybe Mom and Dad wouldn't have needed to sell the house. The accusation hit like a physical blow. After he left, Jasmine put her arm around my shoulders. He's just trying to get under your skin. Don't let him. What if he's right? I whispered. What if my constant criticism pushed them into making this decision? Stop, Jasmine said firmly. You've supported Kyle through countless failed ventures. You're allowed to have your own dream without apologizing for it. I nodded, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, alone in Jasmine's guest room, I scrolled through old photos on my phone, snapshots of my grandparents' house through the years. The Christmas when Kyle and Mark had hung lights all along the roofline as a surprise for me. The summer we'd all repainted the porch together, ending in a paint fight that left more color on us than on the wood. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. We miss you. The house misses you. I didn't respond, but I cried myself to sleep. The next morning, I arrived at Frame and Focus to find Victor Torres, my grandfather's former lawyer, waiting on the steps. Victor! I hurried forward to hug the man who'd been a fixture at my grandparents' dinner table for decades. What brings you here? Your passion project, he smiled, gesturing to the building. And some unfinished business from your grandfather. Inside, over coffee in what would soon be the cafe area, Victor placed a leather portfolio on the makeshift table. Edward asked me to give you this when the time was right. With everything happening with the house and this new venture of yours, it seems the time has come. I opened the portfolio with trembling fingers. Inside was a deed and a letter dated just weeks before my grandfather's death. Nearly 16 years ago, my dearest Ellie, the letter began in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. By the time you read this, the house will have been in the Morgan family's care for some time. What they don't know, what no one knows but Victor and myself, is that when I arranged the sale, I made you a silent co-owner. My coffee cup clattered against the table. What? Victor nodded. Edward knew how much that house meant to you. He arranged for 49% ownership to be placed in a trust for you, accessible when you turned 30 or when the house was to be sold, whichever came first. But I'm 32, I said, confusion mixing with the shock. Why didn't you tell me when I turned 30? The trust had a specific condition, that you not be told unless the house was in jeopardy. Edward didn't want to create family tension unnecessarily. Victor's eyes twinkled. Your grandfather was many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. I stared at the deed, trying to process the implications. So the sale to the new buyers cannot proceed without your signature, Victor confirmed. As a co-owner, you have right of first refusal. Emotions crashed through me. Vindication, shock, and a strange sense of my grandfather's presence, as if he'd reached across time to protect both me and his beloved home. Does this mean I can stop the sale entirely? Victor's expression grew serious. You could, legally speaking. But before you make any decisions, consider what that would mean for your family relationships. Some battles win the war but lose the peace, if you understand me. I nodded slowly, my mind racing with possibilities. I need to think. Of course. Victor gathered his papers. Edward always said you had not just his eye for photography, but his strategic mind as well. He'd be proud of what you're building. Here. After he left, I sat motionless, staring at the deed that changed everything. I'd been so focused on my pain, on creating something new from the ashes of what I'd lost, that I'd never considered I might be able to save my childhood home after all. But at what cost? The renovation of Frame and Focus had consumed most of my savings. Even with my ownership stake, I couldn't afford to buy out the Morgans' share of the house. And using this legal surprise as a weapon would only deepen the family wounds. My phone buzzed with a text from Leo. Electrical estimate confirmed. $30K, not $25K, need decision by tomorrow. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of two dreams pulling me in opposite directions. My childhood home or my future vision. The past or the possibility. The sound of the front door opening made me look up. Mark stood there, holding a folder, and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. Your contractor called me about the electrical issues, he said without preamble. I have a solution. He sat across from me and opened the folder, revealing financial projections and partnership agreements. I've been thinking about this ever since I saw what you're creating here, he continued. What if we combine resources? My software expertise, your artistic vision. We could expand the Frame and Focus concept to include digital media labs, virtual reality photography experiences, online education platforms. I stared at him. You want to be part of this? I want to be part of something that matters, he said, simply. And this matters, Ellie. To you, to the community, and to me. The sincerity in his eyes made my throat tighten. I slid the deed across the table to him. There's something you should know. I watched as confusion, shock, and finally understanding passed across his face as he read the document. You're co-owner of the house, he said, his voice hollow. All this time. I just found out this morning, I assured him. Victor brought the papers. Mark's expression was unreadable. So you could block the sale, stop the brewery headquarters. I could, I agreed quietly. But that's not what I want. What do you want, Ellie? The question hung between us, weighted with all that had happened in the past weeks. I took a deep breath. I want to stop fighting. I want to build something that honors my grandfather's legacy without destroying our family in the process. Mark reached across the table and took my hand. Then let's figure this out, together. That night, we invited Robert, Diana, and Kyle to meet us at Frame and Focus. The main room was illuminated by temporary construction lights, creating dramatic shadows across the partially renovated space. When they arrived, Diana immediately tried to hug me. I stiffened but didn't pull away. What's this about? Robert asked, looking around with grudging appreciation at the work in progress. I placed the deed on a makeshift table in the center of the room. Before we discuss anything else, you need to see this. As Robert read the document, his face paled. This isn't possible. It's not only possible, it's legally binding, Victor confirmed, stepping forward from where he'd been waiting in the shadows. Edward was quite thorough. Kyle snatched the paper from his father's hands, his eyes widening as he scanned it. You can't stop the sale now. We've already started brewery renovations. I'm not going to stop the sale, I said calmly, but I am going to negotiate new terms. I unrolled a set of architectural plans on the table. This is my proposal. The house remains in the family, with my ownership stake acknowledged. The main floor and grounds can become Kyle's brewery headquarters. It's an ideal location, I agree. But the second floor, with my grandfather's darkroom and studio, becomes an annex of Frame and Focus, dedicated to photography education for underserved youth. We create a collaborative space rather than competing businesses. The silence that followed was profound. You want us to coexist? In the same building? Kyle finally asked, his tone somewhere between disbelief and curiosity. We're family, I replied simply. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Robert studied the plans with a critical eye. The zoning would allow for this mixed use? I've already checked, Victor confirmed. With the historic designation of the property, a combined arts and hospitality venue would actually qualify for additional tax incentives. What about your investors? Mark asked Kyle. Would they accept this arrangement? Kyle's expression shifted from resistant to calculating. A craft brewery with an integrated arts component would differentiate us in the market. We could host photography exhibits paired with beer releases, collaborative events. Exactly. I nodded. Frame and Focus gets its darkroom annex without the additional renovation costs. Upscale Brew gets a unique cultural dimension, and the house stays in the family, preserving my grandfather's legacy. Diana wiped tears from her eyes. He planned this all along, didn't he? Edward knew someday we'd need to find a way to honor both the past and the future. I thought of my grandfather, with his photographer's eye that could see beyond the surface to the heart of things. I think he hoped we'd find a way to build something together, not tear each other apart. Robert extended his hand to me, formal as always, but with a new respect in his eyes. We have a deal, Ellie. As we worked out the details, I stepped away for a moment, climbing the stairs to what would become the education center's main classroom. Through the window, I could see my grandparents' house, my house, our house, illuminated by streetlights, its distinctive silhouette, a constant in a changing neighborhood. Footsteps behind me announced Kyle's presence. You could have taken it all, he said quietly. Legal leverage, community support, the moral high ground. Why didn't you? I turned to face my brother-in-law, seeing beyond his usual bravado to the uncertainty beneath. Because winning isn't the same as succeeding, I replied. My grandfather understood that. He built things that lasted. That house, his photography legacy. I want to build something that lasts too. Kyle nodded slowly. I've been thinking about what you said, about helping people versus just serving them drinks. What if the brewery included a training program for at-risk youth? Brewing, hospitality, business skills? The sincere question surprised me. That would be remarkable, actually. I'm not just about get-rich-quick schemes, you know, he said, a hint of his old defensiveness returning. I want to create something meaningful, too. Then let's do it together, I offered. A joint program between Frame and Focus and Upscale Brew. Arts and business, creativity, and practicality. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of my grandparents' house, now transformed into a unique hybrid of brewery headquarters and photography education center. The grand opening celebration had brought together the entire community, with local media covering the innovative family partnership. Where the living room had once been, gleaming brewing tanks now caught the light from the original stained glass windows. Upstairs, my grandfather's darkroom had been carefully restored, expanded and modernized to serve both traditional and digital photography education. To new beginnings, Mark raised his glass, standing beside me as we watched students from our first youth program proudly showing their photographs in what had once been the dining room. And honored endings, I added, thinking of my grandfather. Diana approached, carrying a small wooden box. We found this in the attic during renovations. I think Edward would want you to have it now. Inside was my grandfather's first camera, along with a stack of never-developed film negatives. A note in his handwriting read simply, "For Ellie, when she's ready to see the world through her own lens and mine." As tears filled my eyes, I realized that sometimes losing what you thought you needed leads you to what you were meant to create all along. Not a battle over the past, but a bridge to the future. One built with the unexpected materials of compromise, creativity, and the foundations laid by those who came before us. The house remained standing, but transformed, like all of us, into something that honored its history while embracing new possibilities. And in that transformation, I found not just peace with my family, but a deeper understanding of my grandfather's most important lesson, that the most powerful images are those that tell the truth about both what was and what could be. The weekend after my meeting with Victor Torres was a blur of activity. Armed with the knowledge of my co-ownership of my childhood home, I had options I never thought possible. But making the right choice, one that would honor my grandfather's legacy without destroying what remained of my relationship with Mark's family, required careful thought. I spent Saturday morning in the half-renovated Frame and Focus building, sitting cross-legged on the floor beneath the magnificent skylight, surrounding myself with 3 distinct piles of documents: the legal papers from Victor, the electrical, repair estimates from Leo, and my original business plan. The morning light streamed through the stained glass fragments, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the weathered wooden floor, a visual reminder of how beauty can emerge from broken pieces. "This is quite the war room setup," Jasmine commented, arriving with coffee and bagels. She navigated carefully around my paper archipelago. "Have you slept at all?" "Sleep is for people whose in-laws haven't sold their family legacy out from under them," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Besides, I needed the quiet to think. "And?" Jasmine settled on the floor across from me. "What's the verdict?" I took a deep breath. "I'm going to use the co-ownership as leverage, but not in the way Victor probably expected." "Meaning?" "I'm meeting with Robert and Diana tonight. I'm going to propose a partnership." Jasmine's eyebrows shot up. "A partnership? With the people who betrayed your trust and sold your childhood home without even consulting you?" "With my family," I corrected gently, "however flawed they might be." "Okay," Jasmine said slowly. "I'm going to need more details on this master plan." I pulled out a sketch I'd been working on. The house has always been divided naturally into 2 zones. The main floor was the family space: living room, dining room, kitchen. The upstairs was my grandfather's photography domain, his darkroom, studio, and archive room. What if we honor that division? Kyle gets the main floor for his brewery headquarters. I get the upstairs for a Frame and Focus annex focusing on photography education. Jasmine studied the rough sketch. "And you think Kyle will go for sharing his precious brewery space?" "He might not have a choice," I replied, tapping Victor's legal document. "But more importantly, I think it actually makes sense for both of our businesses. Kyle gets a unique cultural dimension for his brewery, and I get to preserve my grandfather's darkroom without the additional renovation costs." "It's elegant," Jasmine admitted. "If your in-laws are rational people." I laughed without humor. "That's the part I'm not sure about." My phone rang, Mark calling again. After our confrontation at Frame and Focus, we'd been circling each other, cautiously, neither quite ready to bridge the gap that had opened between us. This time, I answered. "Hey," his voice was tentative. "Leo called me about the electrical issues. 30,000 is steep." "It is," I agreed, wondering why my contractor was discussing my financial challenges with my husband. "I've been thinking," Mark continued, "what if I helped? Not just with money, but with expertise. My software experience could add a digital component to your photography center. Virtual galleries, online education platforms. We could make Frame and Focus both traditional and cutting edge. The sincerity in his voice caught me by surprise. You want to be part of this? I do, he said simply. I should have supported you from the beginning. I'm sorry, Ellie. The apology loosened something tight in my chest. There's something you should know before we discuss this further. Can you meet me at Frame and Focus in an hour? After hanging up, I looked at Jasmine. Change of plans. I'm telling Mark about the co-ownership first. Probably wise, she nodded. He is your husband, after all. Mark arrived exactly on time, carrying a laptop and a folder of notes, always the prepared engineer. His expression when he saw me sitting among the scattered papers was a mixture of concern and determination. You look like you're planning a corporate takeover, he joked awkwardly. Something like that, I replied, patting the floor beside me. Sit. There's something you need to see. I handed him Victor's documents without preamble. The confusion on his face slowly transformed to shock as he read. Your grandfather made you co-owner of the house? He finally managed. All this time? I just found out yesterday, I assured him. Victor brought the paperwork. Mark stared at the legal language as if trying to find a loophole. So you can block the sale. Stop the brewery headquarters. I could, I agreed, but that's not what I want to do. What do you want, Ellie? The question carried the weight of everything that had happened between us. I showed him my sketch of the divided house. I want to create something that honors my grandfather without destroying our family in the process. A collaborative space, instead of competing businesses. Mark studied the drawing, his analytical mind clearly working through the implications. A craft brewery with an integrated arts component, shared resources, divided space, complementary purposes. He looked up, a new respect in his eyes. It's brilliant, actually. You think your parents and Kyle would see it that way? Mark ran a hand through his hair. Dad appreciates efficiency, and this plan has that. Kyle, he'll resist at first, but the uniqueness factor might appeal to him. When was the last time Kyle truly listened to me about anything? I challenged. Mark's silence was answer enough. That's why I need you with me on this, I continued. Not just for Frame and Focus, but for this conversation with your family. It can't be me versus them anymore. He reached for my hand, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. So we approach them together, as a united front. As partners, I corrected, squeezing his hand. In business and in life. As we gathered our papers, Mark paused to look around the space. You know, my software background could really enhance what you're building here. Interactive photography, exhibits, AI-assisted editing tools, virtual reality photography experiences. For the first time in weeks, I saw genuine excitement in my husband's eyes. Not the forced enthusiasm he mustered for his brother's ventures, but real passion. I'd like that, I smiled, feeling a piece of our relationship click back into place. A merger of traditional and digital, past and future. We spent the afternoon refining our proposal, Mark's methodical planning complementing my creative vision. By evening, we had a comprehensive plan to present to the Morgans, one that honored both businesses while preserving my grandfather's legacy. Ready for this? Mark asked as we pulled into his parents' driveway. The house. My house, I reminded. Myself. Looked the same as always. The warm porch light welcoming despite everything that had happened. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, gathering our presentation materials. Diana opened the door before we could knock, her expression a mixture of relief and wariness. Ellie, we weren't sure you'd come. We need to talk, I said simply. Robert was in the dining room reviewing paperwork with Kyle. Both men looked up with surprise when I entered. The prodigal daughter-in-law returns, Kyle quipped, though the usual edge in his voice was tempered with something like uncertainty. This isn't a social call, I replied, placing Victor's folder on the table between us. There's something you all need to see. The atmosphere in the room changed dramatically as Robert read the documents, his businessman's composure slipping to reveal genuine shock. This can't be right, he muttered, reaching for his reading glasses to examine the papers more closely. It's not only right, it's legally binding, Mark confirmed. Victor Torres verified everything. My grandfather-in-law was quite thorough. Kyle snatched the papers from his father's hands, his eyes widening as he scanned them. You've been co-owner all this time? And now you're going to block the sale? After we've already signed preliminary agreements? I could block it, I acknowledged calmly. But that's not why I'm here. I unrolled the architectural plans we'd prepared, positioning them on the dining room table, the very table where my grandmother had taught me to serve tea properly, where my grandfather had spread out his photographs for family critiques. This is our proposal. The house remains in the family, with my ownership stake acknowledged. The main floor can become Kyle's brewery headquarters as planned. But the second floor, with my grandfather's darkroom and studio, becomes an annex of Frame and Focus, dedicated to photography education. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert recovered first, his businesslike demeanor reasserting itself as he studied the plans with calculated interest. A shared space? How would that work practically? Mark stepped forward with the operational details we'd prepared. Separate entrances, divided utility costs, shared maintenance responsibilities. Kyle paced the length of the room, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and reluctant curiosity. So you want us to coexist? In the same building? After everything that's happened? We're family, I replied simply. Isn't that what families are supposed to do? Find a way forward. Together? This is unexpected, Diana said, her voice unsteady. We thought you hated us. I was angry, I corrected. I still am, to be honest. You sold my childhood home, the place where my grandfather created his most important work, without even considering how it would affect me. But hatred doesn't build anything worth having. Robert tapped the plans thoughtfully. The zoning would allow for this mixed-use arrangement? We've already checked, Mark confirmed. With the historic designation of the property, a combined arts and hospitality venue would actually qualify for additional tax incentives. I could almost see Robert's mind calculating the financial implications. And the brewery investors? Would they accept this modification? We all looked at Kyle, who had stopped pacing and was studying the plans with newfound interest. A craft brewery with an integrated arts component, it would differentiate us in the market. We could host photography exhibits paired with limited beer releases, collaborative events. Exactly, I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. Frame and Focus gets its darkroom annex without additional renovation costs. Upscale Brew gets a unique, cultural dimension. And the house stays in the family, preserving my grandfather's legacy while moving into the future. Your grandfather planned this, didn't he? Diana said softly, understanding dawning in her eyes. He knew someday we'd need to find a way to honor both the past and the future. I thought of my grandfather, with his photographer's eye that could see beyond the surface to the essence of things. I think he hoped we'd find a way to build something together, not tear each other apart. Kyle's resistance was visibly crumbling. The upstairs would be completely separate. My brewery clients wouldn't have photography students wandering through. Separate entrances, separate operations, Mark confirmed, but with the option for collaborative events when it makes sense for both businesses. And my investors would love the historic aspect, Kyle mused, almost to himself. The artisanal narrative writes itself. Craft beer in a craftsman house with a legendary photographer's studio upstairs. Robert stood, extending his hand to me, formal as always, but with a new respect in his eyes. We have a deal, Ellie, subject to working out the details, of course. As Mark and Robert began discussing the legal frameworks needed, Kyle approached me tentatively. "Can I see the plans again?" I spread them out on the sideboard, and we stood side by side, studying the proposed layout. "You could have taken it all," he said quietly, a grudging admiration in his voice. "Legal leverage, community support, the moral high ground. Why didn't you?" The question surprised me with its sincerity. "Because winning isn't the same as succeeding," I replied after a moment. My grandfather understood that. He built things that lasted. This house, his photography legacy. I want to build something that lasts too. Kyle nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said at Frame and Focus, about helping people versus just serving them drinks. What if the brewery included a training program? Beer making, hospitality, business skills for at-risk youth?" The genuine suggestion caught me off guard. That would be remarkable, actually. "I'm not just about get-rich-quick schemes, you know," he said, a hint of his old defensiveness returning. "I want to create something meaningful, too." For perhaps the first time, I saw my brother-in-law not as the entitled golden child who always got his way, but as someone searching for purpose, same as me. "Then let's do it together," I offered. "A joint program between Frame and Focus and Upscale Brew. Arts and business, creativity and practicality." Something shifted between us then. Not friendship exactly, but a tentative respect. The beginning of something new. Diana watched our conversation from across the room, tears shining in her eyes. When Kyle returned to the discussions with Robert and Mark, she approached me hesitantly. "We should have told you about the sale," she admitted. "We just assumed, since you have your own home with Mark now." "It wasn't about ownership," I tried to explain. "It was about history, about respect." "I'm beginning to understand that," she nodded. "Your grandfather was an extraordinary man, wasn't he? To have arranged all this so long ago." "He saw things others missed," I replied. "It's what made him a great photographer, and apparently a prescient planner." Diana touched my arm tentatively. Would you give me a tour of Frame and Focus sometime? I'd like to see what you're building." The olive branch was small but sincere. "I'd like that," I responded, surprising myself with how much I meant it. The next morning, I arrived at Frame and Focus early, needing time to process everything that had happened. The building was quiet, dust motes dancing in the beams of light from the newly restored skylight. Leo and his team wouldn't arrive for another hour. I climbed to the second floor and stood by the window overlooking Willow Street. From this vantage point, I could just see the roofline of my grandparents' house 4 blocks away. 2 buildings, 2 visions, now interwoven in ways I never could have imagined. My phone rang, Jasmine calling for an update. "They agreed," I told her without preamble. "The partnership plan is moving forward." "All of them? Even Kyle?" Her disbelief was evident. "Even Kyle," I confirmed. "He's actually suggesting a joint training program for at-risk youth, brewing and photography skills combined." "Well, I'll be damned," Jasmine laughed. "Maybe there's hope for him yet. Maybe there's hope for all of us," I mused. After hanging up, I opened my laptop to review the day's construction schedule, but found myself drawn instead to my grandfather's photography portfolio website, which I'd maintained since his death. His black and white images of Riverdale in the 1960s and 70s still resonated, capturing a community in transition, finding beauty in unexpected moments and overlooked places. One photograph in particular caught my attention. The Willow Street Church, now Frame and Focus, photographed in 1972, its stained glass windows illuminated from within, a beacon in the evening darkness. The caption read, "Light finds a way through broken pieces." I'd seen the image countless times, but never fully appreciated its connection to my current situation. My grandfather had photographed the building I now owned, decades before I was born. Another piece of his legacy quietly waiting for me to discover it. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted my thoughts. Mark appeared, carrying 2 coffees and a bakery bag. "Peace offering," he said, holding them out. "Cinnamon rolls from Martinelli's. Your favorite." "You didn't have to do that," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I wanted to," he replied, settling beside me on the window ledge. "Besides, we have a lot to discuss. Dad's lawyers are already drafting the partnership agreement for the house." That was fast. "Dad doesn't waste time when he sees a good business opportunity," Mark smiled ruefully. "And speaking of opportunities, I've been thinking more about the digital component for Frame and Focus." He opened his laptop, showing me mock-ups for interactive exhibits, virtual galleries, and photography education apps, clearly the result of a late night's work. "These are amazing," I said, genuinely impressed. "When did you have time to do all this?" "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, too excited about the possibilities. I studied my husband's face, seeing enthusiasm that had been missing for months, maybe years. "You really want to be part of this, don't you?" "I do," he nodded. "I've spent so long helping Kyle with his ventures and doing corporate software, projects that I'd forgotten what it feels like to work on something that actually matters." The honesty in his voice touched something deep within me. "Partner," I said, extending my hand formally. "Partner," he agreed, taking it, then pulling me into an embrace that felt like coming home. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The partnership agreement for the house was finalized, with Victor Torres overseeing the legal details to ensure my grandfather's wishes were honored. Frame and Focus construction accelerated, with the electrical issues resolved through a combination of my new loan, secured with Mark's software patents as collateral, and a historic preservation grant Jasmine had discovered. Most surprisingly, Kyle and I established a fragile but growing working relationship, meeting weekly to coordinate our plans for the shared house space. His resistance transformed gradually into genuine collaboration as he recognized the marketing potential of our unusual partnership. "What if we called it darkroom brewing instead of upscale brew?" he suggested during one of our planning sessions at the house. We were sitting on the floor of what had been the living room, now stripped to the studs in preparation for brewery equipment. "It ties our concepts together, acknowledges the photography history." "That's actually brilliant," I admitted, surprised by his willingness to incorporate my grandfather's legacy so prominently. "Don't sound so shocked," he grinned, some of his old cockiness returning. "I occasionally have good ideas." "Occasionally," I agreed with a small smile. As we worked together, I began to see glimpses of the brother-in-law I'd once known. Before the failed business ventures, before the resentments had calcified. The boy who had taught Mark and me to play poker using Halloween candy as chips, who had helped me hang Christmas lights along the roofline the year after my grandmother died. One afternoon, as Kyle and I were measuring the upstairs for the darkroom renovation, he paused by the window overlooking the backyard. "Remember when we built that ridiculous treehouse?" he asked suddenly. "The one that collapsed the first time it rained?" I laughed at the memory. "Your dad was so mad about the wasted lumber. But we rebuilt it," Kyle recalled. "Better the second time. It lasted what, 5 years?" 7, I corrected, until the big storm took down half the tree. We fell silent, both looking at the old oak where only a weathered platform remained, barely visible among the branches. "We should rebuild it," Kyle said unexpectedly. "For the visitors, a camera obscura treehouse. How cool would that be?" The suggestion, whimsical, impractical, but undeniably creative, caught me by surprise. "That would be amazing, actually." "See? Collaboration," Kyle nodded, pleased with himself. "It works." As October arrived, both projects progressed rapidly toward their target openings. Frame and Focus was nearly complete, with the main gallery space already hosting photography workshops while finishing touches were added to the classrooms and studios. At the house, the brewery equipment had been installed on the main floor, while upstairs, my grandfather's darkroom had been carefully restored and expanded to accommodate small classes. The local media had picked up our unusual family business story, with the Riverdale Register running a feature titled, "From Family Feud to Fusion, Morgans and Chen Unite, Historic Properties for Arts and Hospitality Revival." The publicity brought unexpected attention from an organization called the Edward Mitchell Photography Foundation, a group I'd never heard of, dedicated to preserving the work and legacy of photographers from the mid-20th century. "Your grandfather's work is significant," explained Sophia Reeves, the foundation's director, as she toured Frame and Focus. "His documentation of small-town America during periods of social change has historical importance that's only now being fully recognized." "I've always known his work was special," I said, "but I never realized there was an entire foundation devoted to photographers like him." "We've been trying to locate his complete archives for years," Sophia continued. "Rumor has it he had an extensive collection of never-published negatives." The mention of archives sent a chill through me. The attic at the house, I haven't had a chance to fully go through everything with the renovations. That evening, Mark and I ventured into the attic of the Craftsman house, navigating carefully around construction materials. The space was dusty but largely untouched by the renovation work below, filled with carefully labeled boxes of my grandparents' belongings. "Over here," I called to Mark, spotting a row of metal filing cabinets tucked under the eaves. My grandfather's neat handwriting marked each drawer: Riverdale 1960-1965, Mountain Series 1968, City Portraits 1970s. With reverent hands, I opened the drawers, finding thousands of negatives and contact sheets, many of which I'd never seen before. At the back of the bottom drawer was a small wooden box with my name carved into its lid. Inside, I found a first edition Leica camera, my grandfather's first professional equipment, along with a stack of undeveloped film rolls and a sealed envelope. The note inside, written in my grandfather's distinctive hand, read, "My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, you've found your way back to the heart of our shared passion. These negatives contain my final project, portraits of our town and its people at crossroads moments of decision, change, and growth. I never printed them, feeling the time wasn't right. Perhaps you will know when that time comes. The camera is yours now, to continue our family's way of seeing the world, finding the light in broken places, the beauty in transition. With all my love, grandfather." Tears blurred my vision as I held the camera that had captured so many moments of Riverdale's history and my own family's story. "We need to develop these," I whispered to Mark, "in the original darkroom before we open to the public." "Of course," he agreed, understanding the importance of this discovered treasure. "A private viewing, just family first." Family. The word carried new weight and meaning after everything we'd been through. The following Sunday evening, we gathered in my grandfather's restored darkroom. Mark, his parents, Kyle, Jasmine, and Victor Torres. The space had been meticulously recreated, down to the red safe light that cast its warm glow over the developing trays. With trembling hands, I processed my grandfather's final rolls of film, watching as images appeared like ghosts on the paper submerged in developer solution. The others remained respectfully quiet, witnessing a kind of magic that digital photography could never replicate. One by one, I hung the dripping prints on the line strung across the room. They were extraordinary, candid moments of transformation captured with my grandfather's unerring eye for emotional truth. A young couple receiving keys to their first home, an elderly shopkeeper closing his business after 50 years, a child taking her first steps in the town square. And there, in the middle of the series, was a photograph that made my breath catch. Robert and Diana, much younger, standing on the porch of the Craftsman house the day they purchased it from my grandmother. They looked nervous, but hopeful, Robert's arm protectively around Diana, who was visibly pregnant with Mark. I remember that day. Robert said softly, his usual businesslike facade cracking with emotion. Your grandmother was so kind to us, even though it must have been hard for her to sell after your grandfather died. She wanted the house to stay in the family, Diana added. She made us promise to keep it that way. I looked at the photograph again, seeing not just my in-laws, but a young couple embarking on their own journey, just as Mark and I had done, just as Kyle was attempting to do in his own way. She would be proud of what we're creating here, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. All of us together. The last print I developed stunned us all into silence. My grandfather had somehow captured an image of me as a child, sitting in his darkroom, watching with wonder as a photograph emerged in the developing tray. The perspective was impossible. He couldn't have taken the picture while also showing himself teaching me, until Victor explained. He rigged a remote timer, the lawyer said, examining the print. Edward was always experimenting with ways to be both photographer and subject, to document the act of seeing while also participating in the moment. The image captured exactly what we were doing now, honoring the past while creating something new, being both observers and participants in our shared story. As we stood surrounded by these newly discovered memories, I felt my grandfather's presence, not as a ghost, but as a foundation upon which we were all building something unexpected and meaningful. To Edward, Victor raised an imaginary glass, who saw further than any of us. And to new beginnings, Kyle added, uncharacteristically solemn. Built on honored endings, I finished. The official joint opening of Darkroom Brewing and the Frame and Focus Photography Annex was scheduled for the first weekend in November. As the day approached, both spaces transformed from construction sites to polished professional venues. Brewery equipment gleamed on the main floor of the Craftsman House, while upstairs, photography exhibitions lined the walls of what had once been bedrooms, the original darkroom serving as both functional space and historical exhibit. The night. Before the opening, I found myself alone in my grandfather's darkroom, running my fingers along the edge of the enlarger he'd used for decades. Through the window, I could see Frame and Focus illuminated against the evening sky, its restored stained glass glowing from within, just like in my grandfather's photograph from 1972. Full circle, I murmured to myself. In the best possible way. Mark's voice came from the doorway. He entered carrying a small wrapped package. Early opening gift. I wanted you to have it privately. Inside was a framed document, the original deed to the house, with my grandfather's and Victor's signatures, and a new edition, official partnership papers with all our names, Robert, Diana, Kyle, Mark, and mine, each signature representing a piece of the journey that had brought us here. I had it custom framed, Mark explained. The house's past and future together. I traced the signatures with my fingertip. Thank you for this and for standing with me through everything. Partners, he reminded me, echoing our promise from weeks ago, in all things. As we locked up for the night, walking hand in hand, down the front path, I glanced back at my grandparents' house. Our house now, transformed but still standing, still sheltering dreams and possibilities, old and new. Tomorrow would bring the public, the media, the beginning of our shared venture. But tonight, in the quiet, I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in the creaking of the porch steps. The best photographs capture moments of transition, not endings or beginnings, but the luminous space between, where past and future meet. We had found that space, that moment of transition, and transformed it into something none of us could have created alone. Not an ending or a beginning, but a continuation, a story developing slowly, carefully, into something worth preserving. The morning of our grand opening dawned crisp and clear, the November sky a perfect backdrop for the rich autumn colors that painted Riverdale. I arrived at the Craftsman House at dawn, needing a quiet moment before the whirlwind began. Steam rose from my coffee cup as I stood on the porch, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. A dog walker nodded in greeting as she passed, her eyes curious about the transformation of the old house with its new darkroom brewing sign hanging prominently beside the smaller frame and focus photography annex plaque near the side entrance. Inside, the main floor gleamed with polished brewing equipment, the copper tanks catching the early light that streamed through the original stained glass windows. Kyle had outdone himself with the design, managing to honor the craftsman architecture, while creating a modern brewery space. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the earthier sense of hops and barley. I climbed the stairs, running my hand along the banister my grandfather had carved decades ago. The upper floor had been meticulously restored, with the original darkroom as its centerpiece. Around it, the former bedrooms had been converted into gallery spaces and small teaching studios, their walls now adorned with a selection of my grandfather's newly discovered photographs alongside work from local artists who would be teaching at the annex. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Meeting the press liaison at Frame and Focus. Everything okay at the house?" I typed back quickly. "Perfect. Just soaking it all in before the chaos." His response came immediately. "Take your time. This moment belongs to you and your grandfather." The understanding in those simple words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Mark had transformed through this journey as much as I had, finding his own creative purpose in our shared vision, rather than continuing to exist in the shadow of his brother's ventures. My moment of reflection was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Kyle's voice called up the stairs. "Sis? You up there? We've got a situation." The urgency in his tone sent me rushing downstairs. Kyle stood in the entryway, his normally confident posture tense with worry. Behind him, two men in business suits looked impatient. "These gentlemen are from Riverview Investments," Kyle explained quickly. "Apparently, there's some confusion about our loan terms." The taller of the two men stepped forward, extending a folder. "Not confusion, Mr. Morgan. Clarification. The financing was approved based on your original business plan for a standalone brewery. The modified usage as a partial photography center represents a material change to the agreed terms." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November morning. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying," the man continued, his tone professionally detached, "that unless the property returns to its originally proposed use, we'll need to recall the loan immediately." Kyle's face had drained of color. "That's not possible. We're opening today. The equipment is installed, inventory purchased, staff hired." "Perhaps you should have considered that before changing your business model without consulting your financiers," the second man commented coolly. I studied them, noting the expensive watches, the tailored suits, the calculated indifference. These weren't regular bank officers. "You're not actually from Riverview Investments, are you?" I asked. At least, not directly. The taller man's slight smile confirmed my suspicion. "We represent certain private investors who have significant influence with Riverview." "Brewhouse Collective," Kyle muttered, recognition dawning. "The regional chain that tried to buy my concept last year." "They prefer to see themselves as industry consolidators," the man corrected. "And they're very interested in this location. If you're unable to meet the loan terms, they'd be prepared to make a generous offer for the property and equipment." The predatory nature of the situation became clear. These weren't just businessmen enforcing contract terms. They were scouts for a corporate competitor trying to eliminate Kyle's independent brewery before it even opened, using the loan as leverage. "We need time to review our financing options," I said firmly. "Our lawyer will contact you tomorrow to discuss the appropriate interpretation of the loan agreement." The men exchanged glances. "The terms allow for 48 hours to remedy any material breach," the taller one acknowledged reluctantly. "But no more." After they left, Kyle slumped against the wall. "This is a disaster. They're going to force us into default, then swoop in and take everything." The equipment, the location, even the darkroom brewing name I just trademarked. They can't do that, I insisted, though uncertainty gnawed at me. The house is partly mine. They can't force a sale without my consent. Kyle ran his hands through his hair. The brewing equipment is separately financed. Even if they can't, take the house. They can repossess everything that makes the brewery functional. And without the brewery, how do we sustain the photography annex? The question hung in the air between us, highlighting how thoroughly our ventures had become intertwined. What had begun as a compromise to preserve my grandfather's legacy had evolved into a truly integrated business model, each part supporting the other. We're not telling anyone about this today, I decided. The opening proceeds as planned while we figure this out. Figure what out? Kyle asked bitterly. How to come up with $300,000 in 48 hours? If necessary, yes, I replied with more confidence than I felt. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Call Victor. We need his legal expertise. I'll contact Mark. As Kyle made the call, I stepped onto the porch again, this time with a very different feeling from my peaceful morning reflection. The neighborhood still looked the same. Autumn leaves drifting lazily to the ground, neighbors walking their dogs, life continuing undisturbed. But everything had changed. Again. I called Mark, explaining the situation as concisely as possible. I'll be right there, he said immediately. And Ellie? Don't worry. We've come too far to let this stop us now. By the time Mark arrived, Victor Torres was already reviewing the loan documents in the brewery's office, formerly the house's dining room. The elderly lawyer's expression grew increasingly grave as he examined the fine print. It's cleverly done, he admitted finally. The loan is contingent on the property's use as described in the original business plan. The mixed-use arrangement technically constitutes a breach of terms. Can they really call the loan due this quickly? Mark asked. Victor sighed. Unfortunately, yes. The acceleration clause is quite clear. If they determine there's a material breach, they can demand immediate repayment. This is my fault, Kyle said quietly. His usual bravado had evaporated, leaving something I rarely saw in my brother-in-law, humility. I was so excited about our partnership that I didn't think to clear it with the lenders first. We all overlooked it, Mark countered. None of us thought to review the financing terms when we changed the business model. I paced the room, mind racing. Options, Victor. What are our options? 3 possibilities, the lawyer replied methodically. 1. Secure alternative financing within 48 hours to pay off the existing loan. Challenging, but not impossible. 2. Revert to the original business plan. Remove the photography annex and return to a standalone brewery. Or 3. Legal challenge. We could argue that the mixed use doesn't materially affect the property's value or the loan's security. How long would a legal challenge take? I asked. Months, most likely. And the lender could still restrict access to operating capital during the proceedings. Not viable then, Mark shook his head. We can't put everything on hold for months of litigation. And removing the photography annex isn't an option, I said firmly. That's non-negotiable. Kyle looked at me with surprise. Even if it means losing everything? The brewery and the annex? My grandfather protected his legacy for a reason, I replied. I won't be the one to dismantle it. An uncomfortable silence filled the room as the reality of our situation sank in. We had less than 48 hours to secure financing for a hybrid business model that conventional lenders might view as risky, especially with the opening day already upon us. I have some savings, Mark offered. Not enough to cover the full amount, but it's a start. I could sell my equipment, I added, the thought painful but necessary. The professional cameras, my studio gear. Kyle shook his head. That's your livelihood. And even combined, it wouldn't come close to what we need. Victor cleared his throat. Before we resort to such measures, there may be another approach. The Edward Mitchell Photography Foundation expressed interest in your grandfather's archives. Yes? They might be willing to provide funding in exchange for certain rights to his collection. The suggestion felt like another blow. Sell my grandfather's photographs? The negatives he entrusted to me? Not sell, Victor clarified gently. Partner. A cultural institution like the foundation could provide grants, not loans. They might fund the photography annex as a preservation project, which could reduce the commercial financing needed for the brewery portion. It was a creative solution, but the timing seemed impossible. The foundation representative is coming. To the opening tonight, I said. There's no way to negotiate and complete such an arrangement in 48 hours. Perhaps not, Victor acknowledged. But it might buy us time if we can show the lender that alternative financing is being arranged. As Victor and Mark discussed potential approaches to the foundation, I stepped into the hallway, needing a moment to think. The house felt different now, heavy with the possibility of another loss. After everything we'd overcome, the initial betrayal, the competing visions, the family reconciliation, to fail because of fine print and corporate predators seemed unbearably cruel. My gaze fell on a photograph hanging in the hallway, one of my grandfather's newly discovered images showing the Craftsman House under construction in 1922. In the foreground stood a much younger version of my great-grandfather, surveying the half-built structure with determination despite the Great Depression looming on the horizon. He had persevered through economic hardship to create something lasting. Could we do any less? I returned to the office with renewed resolve. We're not canceling the opening. Today proceeds exactly as planned. Ellie, Mark began cautiously, maybe we should consider— No, I cut him off. These corporate vultures are betting we'll panic. That's exactly what they want, to force a rushed sale. We're not giving them the satisfaction. Kyle looked uncertain. What about the 48-hour deadline? We use the opening to our advantage, I replied, a plan forming. The media will be here. Local officials, potential investors. If Darkroom Brewing and Frame and Focus make a strong enough impression tonight, we'll have leverage to negotiate. A risky strategy, Victor observed, though I noticed a glint of approval in his eyes. My grandfather was a risk-taker, I said, drawing strength from the memory of his photographs. He bet on this town when others were leaving. He bet on this house when resources were scarce. And apparently he bet on me long before any of us knew what would happen. For the first time since the investors had appeared, Kyle's familiar confidence resurfaced. I'm in. Let's show them what we've built. The rest of the day passed in a blur of final preparations. The staff arrived. Kyle's brewery team in custom. Denim aprons with the Darkroom Brewing logo. My photography instructors elegant in black. Caterers set up stations featuring food pairings designed to complement Kyle's craft beers. In the photography annex, the gallery lighting was adjusted to showcase my grandfather's work to best effect. Throughout it all, we maintained a united front, giving no hint of the crisis unfolding behind the scenes. When reporters arrived for preview tours, Kyle and I presented our integrated concept with genuine enthusiasm, emphasizing how the dual businesses reflected Riverdale's evolving character, honoring tradition while embracing innovation. By early evening, guests began to arrive. Local officials, community leaders, curious neighbors, and arts patrons filled both levels of the house. The boundary between brewery and photography annex blurred as visitors moved freely between spaces, exactly as we'd intended. Upstairs, photography enthusiasts marveled at my grandfather's historic darkroom and newly discovered works. Downstairs, beer lovers sampled Kyle's craft brews with appreciative murmurs. I was discussing one of my grandfather's photographs with an interested couple when Sophia Reeves from the Edward Mitchell Photography Foundation arrived. Her appraising gaze took in the transformed space, lingering on the careful preservation of original architectural details. Ms. Chen, she greeted me warmly. This is even more impressive than you described. The integration of historic preservation with contemporary function is masterful. Thank you, I replied, guiding her toward the dark room. There's something specific I wanted to show you. In the quiet sanctuary of the dark room, I revealed the collection of negatives and contact sheets we'd discovered in the attic. Sophia's professional composure gave way to genuine excitement as she examined the previously unknown works. This is extraordinary, she breathed, handling the materials with reverent care. An entirely undocumented series. And you developed some of them? Just a few, I confirmed. Enough to understand their significance. Her eyes met mine with keen interest. And what are your plans for this collection? The question I'd been waiting for. I took a deep breath. That's something I hope to discuss with you. The Foundation's mission aligns perfectly with what we're trying to create here. Before I could continue, the darkroom door opened and Diana slipped in, elegant in a navy dress that complemented the darkroom brewing colors. Sorry to interrupt, but the mayor's arrived. Kyle thought you'd want to be downstairs for the official welcome. Of course, I nodded, torn between diplomatic necessity and the crucial conversation with Sophia. Ms. Reeves, would you mind terribly continuing our discussion a bit later? Perhaps during the more formal part of the evening? Not at all, Sophia assured me. This collection isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. It's too important. Her words gave me hope as I followed Diana downstairs. The brewery was now filled to capacity, the atmosphere buzzing with conversation and laughter. Kyle stood near the main tanks, deep in discussion with the mayor and what appeared to be several potential investors. Mark found me near the bottom of the stairs, slipping an arm around my waist. How's it going with the Foundation? Promising, I whispered back. She's definitely interested in the archives. Good, because we may have another option emerging. See the man with Kyle and the mayor? That's Thomas Harrington from Riverdale Heritage Trust. They provide low-interest loans for historic property revitalization. Robert's been working him all evening. I glanced at my father-in-law, who stood nearby, his usual reserved demeanor, replaced by animated conversation as he described the historic significance of the house to an attentive group of listeners. Your father's helping? I asked, surprised. He called in every business connection he has in town, Mark confirmed. Said no corporate raiders were going to undermine his family's venture. The unexpected solidarity warmed something in me. Perhaps our shared crisis had finally cemented the fragile trust we'd been rebuilding. The mayor tapped a glass for attention, and the room gradually quieted. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to officially welcome Darkroom Brewing and the Frame and Focus Photography Annex to Riverdale's vibrant small business community. Polite applause filled the room as Kyle and I moved to stand beside the mayor. What makes this enterprise special, the mayor continued, is how it honors our town's past while creating something new for its future. The collaborative vision of Kyle Morgan and his sister-in-law, Ellie Chen, represents the best of Riverdale's entrepreneurial spirit. As the mayor spoke, I noticed movement at the entrance. The two men from Riverview Investments had returned, observing the proceedings, with poorly concealed displeasure. The successful turnout and community support were clearly not what they had anticipated. Kyle noticed them too, a flash of anxiety crossing his face before he masterfully redirected his attention to the mayor's introduction. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped forward with confident ease. Thank you, Mayor Wilson. When I first envisioned Darkroom Brewing, I saw it simply as a craft brewery. Something Riverdale needed, to be sure, but ultimately just another business venture. He paused, gesturing around the crowded room. What you see today is so much more, the result of true collaboration and a deeper understanding of what makes a place meaningful. He turned toward me with genuine appreciation. My sister-in-law taught me that success isn't just about profit margins or market share. It's about creating something that matters to the community, something that lasts. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the entitled, self-focused Kyle I'd known for years. Something had shifted. Darkroom Brewing and Frame and Focus aren't just businesses sharing a historic building, he continued. They're two halves of a vision for what Riverdale can be. A place that values its artistic heritage and cultural innovation equally. As applause rose again, Kyle gestured for me to join him. When I stepped forward, he surprised me by handing over the microphone. The real visionary behind this partnership, he said simply. Standing before the crowd, neighbors, community leaders, potential investors, and yes, even the men who threatened everything we'd built, I felt a strange calm descend. This house had witnessed nearly a century of Riverdale's history. It had survived economic downturns, changing ownership, and family conflicts. It would survive this challenge too. My grandfather, Edward Mitchell, used to say that a photograph isn't just a record of what was, but a possibility of what could be, I began. When I look around this room, I see exactly what he meant. The possibility of a community gathering place that honors our past while creating new memories. The possibility of education and artistry coexisting with entrepreneurship and innovation. I met the eyes of the Riverview representatives directly. Some might see this dual-purpose space as unconventional or even risky, but the greatest rewards often come from the boldest visions. My grandfather understood that when he documented Riverdale's evolution through decades of change, Kyle and I understand it as we blend two seemingly different ventures into something greater than either could be alone. Sophia Reeves from the foundation nodded approvingly from where she stood near the darkroom stairs. Thomas Harrington from the Heritage Trust was taking notes. Even Robert looked uncharacteristically proud. So please, I concluded, enjoy exploring both the brewery and the photography annex tonight. Sample Kyle's masterfully crafted beers. Examine my grandfather's newly discovered photographs upstairs. And remember that Riverdale's strength has always been in its ability to honor tradition while embracing change. The response was enthusiastic, with guests immediately resuming their exploration of the dual spaces. As the crowd dispersed, Sophia approached, accompanied by an older gentleman I didn't recognize. Ms. Chen, that was beautifully expressed, she said. Allow me to introduce Howard Levinson, the Foundation's Director of Preservation Projects. The distinguished man shook my hand warmly. Your grandfather's work was instrumental in my own early photography career. This space you've created, it's exactly the kind of living preservation our foundation seeks to support. My pulse quickened. We're very interested in discussing possible collaboration with the foundation. As are we, Howard confirmed. In fact, we'd like to propose something rather significant. The foundation has been seeking a satellite location for educational programming. Your dual-use model here, with working darkroom facilities and gallery space, presents an intriguing opportunity. Sophia continued seamlessly. We're prepared to offer substantial grant funding for the photography annex portion of your venture, in exchange for educational access to the facilities and shared curatorial oversight of your grandfather's archives. The proposal was better than anything I could have hoped for. Not just temporary funding to address our immediate crisis, but a sustainable partnership that would ensure the photography annex's long-term viability. That sounds extremely promising, I replied, struggling to maintain professional composure when I wanted to hug them both. When might we discuss specific terms? No time like the present, Howard smiled. We brought a preliminary proposal with us. Shall we find a quieter spot to review it? As we headed toward the office, I caught Kyle's eye across the room. He was deep in conversation with Thomas Harrington from the Heritage Trust, but the subtle thumbs up he flashed told me his discussions were going equally well. The rest of the evening unfolded with a dreamlike quality. While guests continued to enjoy the grand opening festivities, a series of meetings took place in the former dining room. The foundation representatives outlined a generous grant proposal that would fund approximately half of our needed amount. Thomas Harrington expressed the Heritage Trust's interest in providing a low-interest loan for the remainder, secured by the historic property's cultural significance rather than conventional collateral. By the time the last guests departed, we had verbal commitments that, while not resolving our 48-hour deadline completely, provided enough substantive progress that Victor felt confident we could negotiate an extension from Riverview. Corporate raiders thrive on distress and confusion, the lawyer explained as we gathered for a post-event assessment. When they see organized resistance and viable alternatives, they typically reassess their aggressive tactics. Kyle, unusually subdued despite the evening's success, studied the preliminary agreements. So we're really doing this? Creating a partnership with a National Photography Foundation and a heritage preservation group? Having second thoughts? I asked, prepared for his entrepreneurial spirit to chafe at the additional oversight these partnerships would entail. To my surprise, he shook his head. The opposite, actually. This is bigger than what I originally envisioned, more meaningful. Robert, who had remained after Diana went home exhausted, cleared his throat. Your business model is unconventional, but tonight proved it has merit. These institutional partnerships add credibility and stability, and they preserve the dual-purpose nature of the space, Mark added, which was always the most important aspect to Ellie. I thought about how far we'd come, from my initial anger at being excluded from the house sale to this moment of collaborative possibility. It's not what any of us planned, I acknowledged, but maybe it's better for that very reason. The next morning, Victor and Kyle met with the Riverview representatives. Armed with our preliminary agreements from the Foundation and Heritage Trust, they successfully negotiated a 2-week extension on the loan terms, enough time to finalize the alternative financing arrangements. When they returned to the house, Kyle's expression was a mixture of relief and lingering concern. We've got breathing room, but they're not happy. The Brewhouse Collective really wanted this location. Let them be unhappy, Robert said dismissively. They played hardball and lost. That's business. Kyle looked at his father with new appreciation. Thanks for backing us up, Dad. I know this isn't the straightforward brewery investment you originally signed on for. It's better, Robert replied simply. More sustainable, less vulnerable to market trends or corporate predators. I studied my father-in-law, seeing him with fresh eyes. His initial betrayal in selling the house without consulting me had stemmed not from disrespect, but from a lifetime of traditional business thinking. The past months had expanded his perspective as much as they had Kyle's. We should celebrate. Properly, I suggested, feeling the tension of the past 24 hours finally easing. Family dinner tonight? At the apartment, not here. I think we all need a break from this place, just for one evening. The agreement was unanimous. As everyone dispersed to handle various follow-up tasks from the opening, I found myself alone, in the dark room once more. The red safe light cast its warm glow over the developing trays. Empty now, but ready for the photography classes scheduled to begin the following week. On the wall hung the photograph of my grandfather teaching me to develop my first print, the impossible image he'd created using a remote timer. Looking at it now, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Photography wasn't just about preserving moments. It was about creating them. About seeing possibilities where others saw only what existed in the present. My grandfather had seen the possibility of family conflict over the house decades before it happened. He'd created a legal safety net to ensure his legacy would continue. But more importantly, he'd taught me to see beyond the surface of things, a skill that had ultimately allowed us to transform a painful betrayal into something unexpectedly meaningful. I touched the photograph gently. We did it, I whispered to his memory. Not exactly as you planned, perhaps, but we found a way forward together. Outside the darkroom window, autumn leaves drifted from the old oak tree in the backyard. The weathered platform of the long-ago treehouse was just visible among the branches. a reminder of Kyle's unexpected suggestion that we rebuild it as a camera obscura, another possibility waiting to be realized. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed leads you to discover what you were meant to create all along. My grandfather had understood that truth through his camera lens. Now, I understood it through the viewfinder of my own experience, a family portrait, imperfect but authentic, developing slowly in the careful balance of light and shadow. 3 weeks after the grand opening, both businesses were finding their rhythm. Darkroom Brewing had developed a loyal local following, with weekend evenings bringing a steady stream of customers eager to sample Kyle's craft beers in the unique historic setting. Upstairs, the Frame and Focus Photography Annex had launched its first series of workshops, teaching everything from darkroom fundamentals to digital editing techniques. The Edward Mitchell Photography Foundation's partnership had brought not just financial stability, but also professional credibility, attracting serious photography enthusiasts from throughout the region. I was in the middle of teaching a film development class to a group of high school students when my phone began vibrating insistently in my pocket. Stepping aside while the students practiced loading film onto developing reels, I checked the screen. 5 missed calls from Mark and a text that simply read, "Emergency at Frame and Focus. Come now." "I'm sorry," I told the class, my heart suddenly racing. "I need to step out for an emergency. Please continue practicing with the reels, and I'll be back as soon as possible." I hurried down the back stairs and out to my car, dialing Mark as I went. No answer. The 4-block drive to Frame and Focus felt interminable, my mind conjuring increasingly dire scenarios. Fire? Flood? Another financial crisis? When I pulled up, my stomach dropped. 3 fire trucks were parked outside the building, lights flashing. Firefighters moved in and out of the main entrance, and a small crowd of onlookers had gathered across the street. I spotted Mark standing near one of the trucks, talking intently with a fire captain. His face was ashen, his usually neat hair disheveled as if he'd been repeatedly running his hands through it. "What happened?" I demanded, rushing to his side. "Electrical fire," he replied, his voice tight. "Started in the walls of the north wing near the main gallery." The fire captain nodded grimly. "We've contained it, but there's significant damage to the electrical system and structural elements in that section of the building. Water damage, too, from the suppression efforts." "How bad?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Bad enough," the captain replied honestly. "That portion of the building isn't safe to occupy until repairs are made. The rest of the structure appears stable, though everything will need inspection." Mark put his arm around my shoulders. "The good news is nobody was hurt. Leo and 2 of his workers were the only ones in the building when it started, and they got out immediately." As if summoned by his name, Leo appeared from around one of the fire trucks. The contractor looked exhausted, his face smudged with soot. "Ellie, I'm so sorry. We were finishing the classroom renovations when the alarms went off. Smoke was already pouring from the walls." "Do we know what caused it?" I asked. The fire captain consulted his clipboard. "Preliminary assessment suggests faulty wiring interacting with the older knob and tube system in that section of the building. We'll know more after the fire inspector's full report." "Faulty wiring?" I repeated, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. "But we just had everything completely rewired. That's what the $30,000 electrical upgrade was for." Leo shook his head, clearly troubled. "That's what I don't understand. We replaced everything in that section, used a licensed electrical contractor, pulled all the proper permits." "We'll need to see all the permits and contractor information," the captain said. "The inspector will want to review everything." As the firefighters began clearing their equipment, we were finally allowed to enter the building to assess the damage. The acrid smell of smoke and wet ash hit me as soon as we stepped inside. The beautiful skylight still illuminated the central hall, but rays of sunlight now revealed dancing dust particles and lingering smoke. The north wing, which housed our main exhibition gallery and one classroom, was devastated. Charred wall, Studs were exposed where firefighters had torn away drywall to access the flames. The hardwood floors were warped from water damage, and everything reeked of smoke. "The photographs," I whispered, hurrying toward the gallery. Mark caught my arm. "The fire department already checked. Most of the exhibition pieces were affected by smoke, but the damage is minimal. They've been removed for conservation." I nodded, relieved that at least my grandfather's works and those of our local artists hadn't been destroyed. Still, seeing the ruined space, which just that morning had been filled with light and creativity, felt like a physical blow. "How long?" I asked Leo, who was examining the exposed wiring with growing concern. "To repair everything properly?" He shook his head. 2 months minimum, and that's assuming the insurance comes through quickly." 2 months? The time frame seemed impossible. "We have classes scheduled, exhibitions planned. The foundation is sending their education director next week to finalize the satellite program details. I'll call Victor," Mark said, already pulling out his phone. "He can help navigate the insurance process, maybe get things expedited." As Mark stepped away to make the call, Leo pulled me aside, his expression grave. "Ellie, something's not right here. The wiring that failed, it's not what we installed." "What do you mean?" He pointed to a section of charred electrical cable exposed in the wall. "See this? It's aluminum wiring, much older than what we put in, which was all copper. And these junction boxes aren't up to code. None of this matches our work." I stared at the evidence, struggling to make sense of it. "You're saying someone tampered with the electrical system after your work was completed?" "I can't think of any other explanation," Leo replied. "We should wait for the fire inspector's report, but—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the implications. "But what, Leo?" "The timing is suspicious. Right after you secured the partnerships that saved both businesses. Right when everything was going well." He lowered his voice. "Remember those investors who tried to force Kyle into default? The ones who wanted this location?" The suggestion seemed almost too sinister to contemplate, yet I couldn't dismiss it entirely. Corporate competitors resorting to sabotage? It sounded like something from a movie, not real life in our small town. "Let's not jump to conclusions," I said, though uncertainty gnawed at me. "We'll wait for the official investigation." Mark returned, his expression slightly less bleak. "Victor's already contacting the insurance company. Says we should document everything ourselves too. Photos, video, inventory of all damaged items." As we began the grim task of cataloging the destruction, my phone rang. "Kyle." "I just heard," he said without preamble. "Are you okay? How bad is it?" "The north wing is destroyed," I replied, watching a firefighter carry out a sodden stack of photography textbooks. "The rest has smoke damage. I'm closing the brewery for the day," Kyle said immediately. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. We'll figure this out." His unhesitating support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thanks, Kyle." By evening, the initial shock had given way to practical concerns. We'd assembled a crisis team at the Craftsman house. Mark, Kyle, Victor, Leo, and representatives from both the Foundation and Heritage Trust. The dining room table was covered with insurance forms, repair estimates, and contingency plans. "The insurance adjuster will come tomorrow," Victor explained, organizing the documentation we'd gathered. "But we should be prepared for delays. Fire claims, especially with possible electrical code violations, can be complicated." "We can't wait for the insurance to resolve," I insisted. "We have commitments to students, faculty, exhibiting artists." "Not to mention the foundation partnership," Mark added. "If we can't deliver on the educational programming we promised, they might reconsider the grant funding." Sophia Reeves from the foundation, who had driven in from the city upon hearing the news, shook her head. "The foundation's commitment isn't wavering. We believe in what you're creating here." "But practically speaking," I pressed, We need functional space for the programs. Thomas Harrington from the Heritage Trust studied the preliminary repair estimates Leo had provided. The trust can expedite the emergency loan process for historically significant properties. It won't cover everything, but it could get repairs. Started while the insurance claim processes. And what about temporary space? Kyle interjected. Could some of the photography classes be held here in the meantime? We could rearrange the brewery schedule to accommodate morning workshops before we open to the public. I looked at my brother-in-law with genuine gratitude. You'd do that? He shrugged, though I could see the sincerity behind his casual demeanor. We're partners, right? Besides, the dark room up here is actually bigger than the one at Frame and Focus. As the others discussed logistics, I slipped outside for a moment of quiet. The night air was crisp with approaching winter, stars sharp in the clear sky above. Leaning against the porch railing, I tried to process the day's events. The fire felt like a cruel twist of fate. Just when everything was finally coming together, just when the family conflicts had begun to heal. The porch door opened behind me, and Diana stepped out, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing me one. "It's the chamomile your grandmother used to make." The familiar scent brought a rush of memories. Sitting in this very kitchen after school, my grandmother steeping tea while I told her about my day. It was a small thing, but the fact that Diana had remembered this detail, had thought to recreate this comfort from my past, touched me deeply. "Thank you," I said, wrapping my cold hands around the warm mug. Diana leaned against the railing beside me. "When your grandfather first built the darkroom upstairs, there was a small fire," she said unexpectedly. "Did you know that?" I shook, my head surprised. "It was before my time, of course, but your grandmother told me the story when we first bought the house. Apparently, he was experimenting with some new chemical process and something went wrong. They caught it quickly, but he was devastated, convinced he'd destroyed her grandfather's house." "What did she do?" I asked, drawn into this piece of family history I'd never heard. Diana smiled faintly. According to her, she told him, "Wood burns. Dreams don't. We'll rebuild the room, and you'll take even better photographs in it." And they did, together. The parallel to our current situation wasn't lost on me. "Is that why you're telling me this?" "Partly," Diana admitted, "but also because I've been thinking about legacy lately. How it's not just about buildings or photographs or even businesses. It's about the spirit that created them. Your grandfather's spirit clearly lives on in you. The determination, the creativity, the ability to see possibilities where others see only problems." Her words warmed me more than the tea. Coming from Diana, who had once seemed to value Kyle's entrepreneurial drive above all else, this recognition felt significant. "We'll rebuild," I said, echoing my grandmother's words. "And it will be even better than before." Diana touched my arm gently. "Of course you will. And we'll help, all of us. That's what family does." Inside, the planning continued late into the night. By morning, we had a workable strategy. Emergency. Repairs would begin immediately, funded by the Heritage Trust loan. Photography classes would temporarily relocate to the darkroom annex at the Craftsman House, with Kyle rearranging the brewery's operations to accommodate them. The foundation would delay the formal launch of their satellite program, but proceed with planning and preparation. What we didn't have was clarity on what had caused the fire. Leo remained convinced that someone had tampered with the electrical system, while the others cautioned against making accusations without evidence. The fire inspector's investigation would take at least a week, leaving us in uncomfortable uncertainty. 3 days later, I was teaching a relocated photography class in my grandfather's darkroom when Kyle burst in, forgetting to knock. A serious breach of darkroom etiquette that could have ruined exposed prints. Sorry, he said, realizing his mistake as several students protectively hunched over their developing trays. "But Ellie, you need to see this. Now." Something in his urgent tone made me follow him immediately, instructing the students to continue with their print development. We hurried downstairs to the brewery office, where Mark was already waiting with Leo and a man I didn't recognize. "This is Dave Mercer," Kyle introduced the stranger. "Head of security at Riverdale Commerce Bank. He has something you need to see." Dave nodded grimly. "Ms. Chen, we've been reviewing security footage at the bank's request. One of our cameras covers the side entrance of the Frame and Focus building due to its proximity to our night deposit box." He opened a laptop and played a video clip. The timestamp showed 2:14 a.m., 3 nights before the fire. A figure in dark clothing approached the Frame and Focus side entrance, looked around furtively, then used what appeared to be a key to enter the building. "That entrance should have been secured," I said, alarmed. "Who would have a key besides staff?" "Keep watching," Kyle said tightly. 27 minutes later, the same figure exited, carrying what looked like a tool bag. The person's face remained obscured by a hood, but something about their build and movements seemed vaguely familiar. "Can you enhance this at all?" Mark asked. "Get a clearer image of their face?" Dave shook his head. "This is as good as it gets with our equipment, but there's one more thing you should see." He forwarded to another clip, time-stamped 1:58 a.m., the night before the fire. The same hooded figure, the same key entry, the same deliberate movements. "They came back," Leo said, his earlier suspicions clearly confirmed. "Twice. First to scope out the electrical system, then to sabotage it." "We've shared this with the fire inspector and police," Dave explained. "They're treating the fire as suspicious now." I stared at the frozen image on the screen, trying to process the implications. Someone had deliberately set the conditions for the fire. Someone with access to a key. "How many keys are there to that door?" Mark asked. "6 that I know of," I replied, mentally cataloging. "Mine, yours, Leo's, Rachel's, since she coordinates the classes, and 2 spares, one in the office and one with the night cleaning service. All accounted for?" Kyle pressed. I hesitated. "I'd have to check with Rachel about the office spare. It's kept in a drawer, not exactly high security." "We should make a list of everyone who might have had access to the building," Mark suggested. "Contractors, staff, students, delivery people. And anyone who might have a motive," Kyle added darkly, "like those Brewhouse Collective goons who tried to force us into default." The conversation continued, analyzing possible scenarios and suspects, but my attention had drifted back to the car security footage. There was something about the figure's movements, a distinctive way of checking over their shoulder, a slight hitch in their stride, that triggered a sense of recognition I couldn't quite place. Later that afternoon, I was sorting through smoke-damaged materials salvaged from the Frame and Focus office when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with the local area code. "Ellie Chen speaking," I answered distractedly. "Ms. Chen, this is Detective Ramsey from Riverdale Police Department. We're investigating the fire at your property." I sat up straighter. "Yes, of course. How can I help?" "We'd like you to come down to the station. There have been some developments in the case that we need to discuss." "What kind of developments?" I asked, suddenly uneasy. "I'd prefer not to get into details over the phone. How soon can you come in?" "I can be there in 30 minutes, I replied, already gathering my things. The detective's tone revealed nothing. "Good. Ask for me at the front desk when you arrive." I called Mark as I drove to the police station, my mind racing with possibilities. Had they identified the person in the security footage? Found evidence of who had tampered with the wiring? The Riverdale Police Department occupied a modest brick building downtown, its interior the typical institutional blend of fluorescent lighting and dated furniture. Detective Ramsey, a compact woman with shrewd eyes and prematurely gray hair, met me in the lobby. "Thank you for coming in," she said, leading me to a small conference room rather than an interrogation room, which I took as a positive sign. "We've been reviewing the security footage from Commerce Bank and conducted preliminary interviews with your staff and contractors." "Have you identified who broke in?" I asked eagerly. We're working on that, she replied noncommittally. What I wanted to discuss with you relates to the electrical work done at Frame and Focus. According to your contractor, Leo Kim, the original rewiring cost was estimated at $30,000, correct? Yes, I confirmed, confused by this line of questioning. It was an unexpected expense just before our opening. And the work was completed approximately 3 weeks ago, she continued. That's right. The final inspection was done the day before our grand opening. Detective Ramsey consulted her notes. The electrical inspector who signed off on the work was James Townsend. Do you know him? I shook my head. I've never met him. Leo handled all the permits and inspections. Mr. Townsend doesn't recall inspecting your property, the detective said, watching my reaction carefully. In fact, his records show he was on vacation that week. The signature on your permit doesn't match his. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying the inspection was falsified? That's impossible. Leo is absolutely trustworthy. Perhaps, Detective Ramsey acknowledged, but someone forged that inspection document. And according to the fire inspector's preliminary findings, the electrical work in the north wing wasn't up to code, not even close. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile these revelations with what I knew about Leo. He had been our contractor from the beginning, recommended by Jasmine, working tirelessly to bring Frame and Focus to life. The idea that he would cut corners so drastically, would forge official documents, it seemed inconceivable. There must be some mistake, I insisted. Maybe one of his subcontractors. We're looking into all possibilities, the detective assured me. But I should tell you that we executed a search warrant at Mr. Kim's office this morning. We found some concerning financial records showing significant gambling debts. He appears to have been under considerable financial pressure. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Leo with gambling debts? The dedicated family man who showed us pictures of his kids every chance he got? Who worked weekends to keep our project on schedule? I find that hard to believe, I said, though doubt had begun to creep in. People have different faces they show to different parts of their lives, Detective Ramsey replied, not unkindly. The question now is whether his financial difficulties led him to cut corners on your electrical work, or whether there's a more deliberate connection to the fire. You think Leo might have started the fire? I couldn't even finish. The sentence, the idea was so preposterous. We're investigating all angles, she repeated, including the possibility that someone pressured him due to his financial vulnerability. Your brother-in-law mentioned some troubling interactions with investors interested in your property? I explained about the Brewhouse Collective's attempt to force Kyle into default, aware of how conspiracy theory it sounded when laid out for a skeptical detective. We'll look into those individuals, she promised. In the meantime, I'd appreciate if you kept our conversation confidential, particularly the details about Mr. Kim. We're still gathering evidence. I left the police station in a daze, the beautiful autumn day now shadowed by suspicion and uncertainty. Could Leo really have compromised our safety to save money? Or worse, could he have been involved in deliberate sabotage? The contractor, who had worked alongside us for months, who had seemed to share our vision for Frame and Focus. Instead of returning to the cleanup efforts, I drove aimlessly through Riverdale, trying to process this new information. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself parking outside Leo's modest home in a quiet residential neighborhood. His company truck wasn't in the driveway, but his wife's car was. Before I could reconsider, I walked to the front door and rang the bell. Sarah Kim answered, her normally cheerful face drawn with worry. The couple's 2 young daughters played in the living room behind her, oblivious to the adults' concerns. Ellie, she said, clearly surprised. Leo's not here. The police wanted to ask him more questions. I know, I replied gently. I just came from the station myself. May I come in? I think we need to talk. Sarah hesitated, then stepped back to allow me entry. She sent the girls to play in their room, then led me to the kitchen where she mechanically offered coffee that I politely declined. "They think Leo had something to do with the fire," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's ridiculous. He would never. He cares about Frame and Focus almost as much as you do." "The police told me about the gambling debts," I said directly, watching her reaction. Sarah's face crumpled. "It started 2 years ago, during the pandemic. Just online poker at first, then sports betting. He promised he'd stopped, but—" She twisted her wedding ring anxiously. "Last month I found out he'd taken a second mortgage on the house without telling me." The confirmation of Leo's financial troubles solidified the sick feeling in my stomach. "Did he tell you about the electrical work at Frame and Focus? That he might have cut corners to save money?" "No," she shook her head emphatically. "He wouldn't do that, Ellie. He's always been meticulous about his work, even when we were struggling. It's the one thing he takes absolute pride in." "Then how do you explain the forged inspection document? The substandard wiring that caused the fire?" Sarah's expression shifted from defensive to confused. "What are you talking about? Leo hired Sanders Electric for your rewiring project. They're expensive, but they're the best. He specifically chose them because of all the vintage wiring in that old church building." Now it was my turn to be confused. "Sanders Electric? No, Leo told us he was using Thames Valley contractors for the electrical work. Said they specialized in historic buildings." "Thames Valley?" Sarah repeated, genuinely puzzled. "They're not electricians. They're a general construction company that mainly does commercial renovations. One of their representatives approached Leo about taking over parts of the Frame and Focus project, but Leo declined." The pieces began to rearrange themselves in my mind. When was this? When did they approach him? "About a month ago," Sarah recalled, "right after you had that zoning issue with your brother-in-law's brewery. The Thames Valley rep said they had connections that could expedite permits, offered Leo a substantial fee to bring them on as consultants. He turned them down." "Do you remember the representative's name?" I asked, a suspicion forming. Sarah thought for a moment. "Richardson, I think. Tall man, very well dressed, always wore expensive watches." The description matched one of the men from Riverview Investments who had threatened Kyle's financing. The same corporate raiders who had tried to force us into default so the Brewhouse Collective could acquire our property. "Sarah, I need to ask you something important," I said, leaning forward. "Does Leo have any connection to the Brewhouse Collective or Riverview Investments? Any relationship at all?" "No," she replied immediately. "But after he turned down Thames Valley, strange things started happening. He began receiving calls at odd hours. Someone broke into his truck and stole his client files. He was worried, enough that he changed all the locks at his office." The picture was becoming clearer, and it wasn't what Detective Ramsey had implied. "The police think Leo cut corners on our electrical work to save money, or maybe even deliberately created conditions for the fire. But that doesn't make sense if he hired Sanders Electric, which you say is a premium contractor." Sarah's eyes widened with realization. "Unless someone interfered with the work after it was completed? The same someone who broke into his truck and stole his client files." "The figure on the security footage," I murmured, remembering the hooded person entering Frame and Focus in the middle of the night. "We need to tell the police about Thames Valley and their connection to Riverview." "Leo's been trying to," Sarah said, frustration evident in her voice. "But they seemed more interested in his gambling debts than his suspicions about corporate sabotage." As I drove from the Kim's house directly to the police station, my mind raced with connections and possibilities. The corporate raiders hadn't given up after failing to force Kyle into default. They'd simply changed tactics, targeting the weakest link in our operation, a contractor with financial vulnerabilities who could be framed for negligence or even arson if their sabotage succeeded. When I arrived at the station, Leo was just emerging from an interview room, looking exhausted but relieved to see me. "Ellie, thank God. I've been trying to explain about Thames Valley and Richardson, but they keep focusing on my personal finances. I know, I said, squeezing his arm reassuringly. I just spoke with Sarah. We're going to straighten this out right now. Detective Ramsey was initially skeptical of our corporate conspiracy theory, as she called it, but agreed to investigate. Thames Valley contractors and their potential connection to Riverview Investments and the Brewhouse Collective. The forged inspection document was key. If Leo had truly hired Sanders Electric as Sarah claimed, then someone else had substituted substandard work and falsified the final inspection. We can prove it, Leo insisted. Sanders Electric will have records of the work they performed, materials purchased, hours billed, and there should be security footage from their supply runs to the building. By evening, the investigation had taken a dramatic turn. Sanders Electric confirmed they had indeed been hired by Leo to rewire frame and focus, providing detailed documentation of the work performed. More damning, when Detective Ramsey obtained Thames Valley's incorporation documents, she discovered the company had been formed just 6 months earlier, with a corporate address that matched a subsidiary of the Brewhouse Collective. It appears you were right about corporate sabotage, she admitted when she called to update me. We're still gathering evidence, but it seems someone went to extraordinary lengths to undermine both your businesses. The relief of Leo's vindication was tempered by the disturbing reality that faceless corporate entities had been willing to endanger lives and livelihoods for the sake of business acquisition. The fire hadn't been an accident or the result of negligence. It had been a calculated attempt to destabilize our operations, perhaps hoping we'd be forced to sell after another financial setback. I shared the developments with the family that evening, gathered once again around the dining room table that had become our crisis headquarters. Thames Valley Contractors is actually a shell company for Brewhouse Collective, I explained. They approached Leo about taking over parts of the frame and focus project, and when he refused, they apparently decided to take matters into their own hands. By sabotaging the electrical work and causing a fire, Mark concluded, his expression hardening. They could have killed someone. Robert, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. This goes beyond aggressive business tactics. This is criminal activity. We need to pursue this through both legal and regulatory channels. The police are building a case, I confirmed, but it could take months to gather enough evidence for criminal charges. And in the meantime, what happens? To frame and focus? Diana asked the question we were all considering. We rebuild, I said firmly. Again, but with full security measures this time, and we make it clear to these corporate predators that we're not going anywhere. Kyle, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the discussion, suddenly slammed his hand on the table. This is my fault. I'm the one who got us tangled up with Riverview and their shady investors. No one could have anticipated this level of criminal behavior, Mark countered. Even from corporate raiders. But Kyle wasn't easily consoled. If I hadn't pushed so hard for the brewery, if I hadn't convinced Mom and Dad to sell the house in the first place, none of this would have happened. His raw guilt surprised me. The entitled, self-centered brother-in-law I'd resented for so long was accepting responsibility not just for his business decisions, but for the cascading consequences they'd created. You couldn't have known, I said, finding myself in the unexpected position of reassuring him. And remember, without your brewery vision, we might never have created the partnership that's actually made both businesses stronger. Kyle met my eyes, doubt warring with hope. You really believe that? After everything that's happened? I do, I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. What these corporate bullies don't understand is that they've only made us more determined, more unified. Diana reached across the table to clasp my hand. Unified is exactly the right word. We're not just business partners anymore. We're family, facing this together. Family. The word that had once felt so fraught with betrayal and resentment now carried a different weight. These people who had sold my childhood home without consulting me had become allies and supporters through crisis after crisis. Not perfect, certainly, but steadfast when it mattered most. As the others continued discussing security measures and rebuilding timelines, I found myself reflecting on how thoroughly my perspective had shifted. My grandfather's house was still gone, in the sense that it was no longer the unchanged repository of childhood memories I'd fought to preserve. But something new and unexpected had taken its place. A collaborative vision that honored the past while creating space for the future. That night, I returned to the darkroom annex alone, needing the familiar comfort of the red safe light and chemical scents. My grandfather's first camera sat on the shelf where I'd placed it, a tangible link between generations of photographers who had worked in this very space. I loaded one of his undeveloped rolls of film onto a reel and began the development process. The rhythmic sequence of chemicals and timing, a meditation that calmed my racing thoughts. When I finally hung the negatives to dry and examined them under the safe light, I gasped. The final roll contained images I'd never expected. Photographs of the Willow Street church building, now frame and focus, taken in various stages of renovation, during the early 1970s. My grandfather had documented the transformation of the abandoned church into a community art space decades before I purchased it for the same purpose. In the last frame, barely visible under the dim red light, was a sign being installed above the church door. Riverdale Arts Collective, Estar 1972. The very organization that had operated the space until funding cuts forced its closure in the early 2000s, creating the vacancy that allowed me to purchase it for frame and focus. The discovery felt like a message across time. My grandfather had photographed the beginning of the building's journey as an art space, and now I was continuing that legacy despite attempts to derail it. His eye had seen the potential in that abandoned church just as clearly as I had. 50 years later. "We come full circle," I whispered to the darkroom's shadows. But the circle keeps expanding. The sabotage attempt, as destructive as it had been, had ultimately revealed the true strength of what we'd built. Not just businesses or buildings, but a network of relationships resilient enough to withstand both family conflicts and corporate attacks. What had begun as my solitary quest to preserve my grandfather's legacy had evolved into a community endeavor, stronger for being shared. Tomorrow would bring insurance adjusters, reconstruction plans, and continued police investigation. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of the darkroom, surrounded by images that connected past to present, I found an unexpected peace. Whatever challenges came next, we would face them together, as partners, as family, as keepers of a legacy that couldn't be burned, flooded, or bought out. The circle would continue to expand, just as my grandfather had somehow known it would, when he quietly made me co-owner of his beloved home, setting in motion events he couldn't have fully foreseen but had somehow trusted would lead to something meaningful. His faith in that uncertain future had been vindicated, though not in any way I could have imagined when I first received that devastating email about the family meeting. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed leads you to discover what you were meant to create all along. The fire had revealed that truth yet again, burning away what was temporary to expose what would endure. Not walls or wiring or even photographs, but the connections between people who chose to rebuild together, stronger than before. 6 months after the fire, I stood on the steps of Frame and Focus, watching as workers installed the final piece of restored stained glass in the skylight. Spring sunshine streamed through the colored panes, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the newly refinished hardwood floors. The reconstruction was finally complete, the building not just restored, but improved, with enhanced security systems and modernized facilities that preserved its historic character. "It's beautiful," Sophia from the Edward Mitchell Photography Foundation said, standing beside me. "Even more striking than before." "Phoenix from the ashes," I agreed, recalling my grandmother's wisdom about rebuilding after loss. The investigation into the fire had led to criminal charges against executives from the Brewhouse Collective for conspiracy, fraud, and reckless endangerment. Their corporate machinations had been exposed in damning detail, becoming a cautionary tale in Riverdale's business community. Thames Valley Contractors had been revealed as nothing more than a shell company, created to infiltrate and sabotage our operations. Their connection to Riverview Investments meticulously documented by Detective Ramsey's thorough investigation. The formal reopening ceremony was scheduled for the weekend, with the mayor, local officials, and press expected to attend. The foundation had expanded their original partnership commitment, impressed by our resilience and the community support that had rallied around us during the rebuilding. The photography annex at the Craftsman House had thrived during Frame and Focus's reconstruction, creating an unexpected synergy between the two locations that we now plan to maintain permanently. "Ms. Chen?" A young woman approached hesitantly, clutching a portfolio. "I'm Natalie Foster. I've been taking classes at the Darkroom Annex. I was hoping you might review my portfolio before the exhibition next month." This was the unexpected joy that had emerged from our challenges, young photographers finding their voice, discovering the magic of both traditional and digital photography through our programs. During the reconstruction, we doubled our educational offerings at the Darkroom Annex, creating opportunities for students like Natalie, who might otherwise never have accessed such resources. "I'd be honored," I replied, gesturing toward the newly outfitted review room. "Let's take a look together." Later that evening, the family gathered for dinner at Mark's and my apartment. No longer the cramped space I'd initially resented, but a home filled with photographs, memories, and plans for the future. Kyle arrived with a rare vintage bottle of wine and news about the brewery's latest expansion. "We're opening a satellite tasting room in the Arts District downtown," he announced, his entrepreneurial enthusiasm tempered now with thoughtful planning. "The Heritage Trust is helping us restore one of the abandoned storefronts as part of their downtown revitalization project." Robert nodded approvingly. "The business plan looks solid. Sustainable growth based on proven success, not speculation." Diana placed a casserole on the table, my grandmother's recipe for Chinese-American fusion that she'd painstakingly learned to prepare. "And the youth mentorship program is ready to launch?" 10 students already enrolled, Kyle confirmed. Frame and Focus handling the creative arts training, Darkroom Brewing covering business fundamentals and hospitality skills. We're calling it Focus on the Future. The transformation in my brother-in-law continued to amaze me. The entitled, self-centered entrepreneur who had convinced his parents to sell my childhood home had evolved into a community-minded businessman who valued legacy and education alongside profit. Our crucible of challenges had forged him into someone I genuinely respected. "I have news too," I said as we settled around the table. "The Edward Mitchell retrospective has been confirmed. The foundation is organizing a national tour of grandfather's work, starting with our gallery space." "That's wonderful," Diana exclaimed. "Edward would have been so proud." "There's more," I continued, pulling an envelope from my bag. "The Smithsonian American Art Museum wants to include his documentation of small-town America in their permanent collection. They're particularly interested in the newly discovered negatives. The achievement felt monumental. My grandfather's work finally receiving the recognition it deserved, becoming part of the nation's artistic heritage." Mark squeezed my hand under the table, sharing in this culmination of our journey. "To Edward," Robert raised his glass, "who saw further than any of us. And to family," I added, looking around at these people who had once been adversaries and were now essential parts of my life, in all its complicated, imperfect glory. After dinner, Mark and I walked to the Craftsman House, now illuminated by the subtle lighting Kyle had installed to showcase its architectural details. Through the main floor windows, we could see the gleaming brewery equipment, while upstairs, the warm glow of the darkroom's safe light indicated a late-night printing session in progress. "Sometimes I still can't believe how it all turned out," Mark said, his arm around my shoulders. from that awful family dinner to this. My grandfather knew, I replied, thinking of the legal precautions he'd taken, the photographs he'd preserved, the legacy he'd protected. He understood that family is worth fighting for, even when it disappoints you. Especially then. We continued. To frame and focus. Now secured for the night but still visible in the moonlight. Its restored stained glass windows, a testament to renewal. The two buildings stood as architectural bookends to our journey, one preserving the past, one creating the future, both now inextricably connected in purpose and spirit. What had begun as a bitter struggle over my childhood home had evolved into something neither side could have envisioned alone, a collaborative legacy that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The silent co-ownership that my grandfather had arranged had been his way of ensuring that eventually, inevitably, we would find our way back to what mattered most. Not the buildings themselves, but the values, memories, and creative spirit they contained. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed leads you to discover what you were meant to create all along. My grandfather had understood this truth and trusted that someday I would understand it too. Standing between these two buildings, between past and future, memory and possibility, I finally did. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.